Okay, so we are doing lesson 3.11, and the learning target today is I can graph a linear equation in slope-intercept form or in standard form. And the directions say for each question, graph the line represented by the equation. So we're going to really look at graphing this week. This whole week is going to be looking at graphing and different ways you might be given information and how you can use that information to help you graph a line. So we've talked about writing equations of lines. We've talked about horizontal lines, vertical lines, all these things. So now we're going to actually take an equation and you're going to be able to graph it. So you know that the equation of a line is y equals mx plus b, where m is your slope and b is the y-intercept. So when you are graphing, you need both of those things to kind of help you. So the first thing you want to look at, so say we look at number 1. The first thing you'll do is kind of pick apart the equation. So I know that this is my y-intercept. And that gives me an actual point on my graph. And I know that that number is my slope, or you might call it your rate of change. Those are synonyms. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to plot my y-intercept. I know that if my y-intercept is -3, that point will be 0, -3, because my x coordinate is always 0 on my y-intercept. So the first thing I'm going to do, besides label my axes here, is plot that 0, -3. Okay, so that right there gives me a point to start. That's my y-intercept. Now, my slope or my rate of change is going to tell me how to move. So we know the slope is the change in y over the change in x. A lot of times you'll also hear slope being described as rise over run. And that's because when you change your y, you're going up and down. So you're rising, or you're going below. Change in x, if you change your x values, you're running. So you're going side to side. So that really helps us, especially when we're looking at graphing, because it tells us how to move. So I know from my equation that my slope, my change in y over change in x, my rise over run is equal to 2. So in order to know how I move, I will put this over 1. I'll make whatever my slope is a fraction. And this is really why we love when slopes are fractions, because it tells us how to move. So in this case, because my slope is positive and my y is positive, I'm going to go up, because up is the positive direction on my y-axis. And because 1 is also positive, I'm going to go right, because right is all my positive numbers. So from my y-intercept, I will rise 2 and I'll run 1. So from my y-intercept, I'll count up 2. That's rise 2, run 1. And I can continue that pattern to get to my next point. Rise 2, run 1. Rise 2, run 1. Rise 2, run 1. And I could even go backwards by going down 2 to the left 1. So I'm going in the opposite direction there both ways. So now I have all the points on my line. I'm going to use a ruler because it's good habit, or a straight edge. If you don't have a ruler, use like the edge of your folder, the edge of your planner, whatever you have available. Always put arrows at the end of your line to indicate that it goes on forever, because we don't have a limitation here. We don't know that it stops. And the best thing you can do, and this will help when we get into our next unit, is label your line. Okay. So, to kind of review, the y-intercept gives us a starting place. The slope tells us how to move from that starting place. Okay, so we're going to try another one. I want to look at this one here, and I know the numbers are kind of out of order. This one says y equals 1/2 x minus 5. So I know that this is my y-intercept. I can plot the point 0, -5. So that's the first thing I'm going to do. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's right here. That's my y-intercept. Now, this is awesome because my slope is already a fraction. So I know my slope, or my change in y over change in x, or my rise over run, is 1/2. Which means I'm going, because it's positive, I'm going up 1 and to the right 2. So up 1, right 2, up 1, right 2. And that's all I can really go on this graph. So I'll only have 3 points to plot. It's not a ton of points, but that's all I have room for on this particular graph. I can connect my dots, put arrows on the end to indicate it goes on forever, and I will label this y equals 1/2 x minus 5. And that's how we can kind of use rise over run to help us. That's why when you say, do I change my slope into a decimal, I say it's not helpful, because this tells you your rise and your run, especially when you're graphing. Awesome. And I just have one more example to show you. This one is a little different. So if you remember at the beginning of the year in Unit 1, we did what was called literal equations, where we had a bunch of letters in an equation and we got one alone. So this is very similar to that. So notice when I graphed my two equations up here, my equations were y equals mx plus b form. If you notice down here, this equation doesn't have y equals. So my first step in this one is just to work with my equation to get y by itself. So I'm going to kind of rewrite it up here. So I'll have 2x minus y equals 3. And I'm going to manipulate this equation or move things around so I can get that y by itself. So if I want to keep this y here, I'm going to undo this 2x by subtracting 2x on both sides. After I do that, I have negative y equals 3 minus 2x. So I can't combine these because they're not like terms. And so to get this y to be positive, I have to divide by negative 1. And I'm left with y equals 3 divided by negative 1 is negative 3. Negative 2 divided by negative 1 is positive 2x. And so now I have y equals mx plus b, and I can see clearly what my slope is, and I can see clearly what my y-intercept is. So my y-intercept is always a number that's not next to x, so negative 3. So again, I will plot negative 3. That's always my starting point. And so my slope, or and I'll come down here, my rise over run is 2. So I know to make 2 a fraction, I can put it over 1. So then because they're both positive, I'm going up 2 over 1. So up 2 over 1, up 2 over 1, up 2 over 1. And if you notice, it's actually the same line I graphed in the first one, but you didn't see that because it was in different form. So again, that's our line, and to be really awesome, I'm going to label it negative 3 plus 2x. That was the line I graphed. And so that's how you kind of graph a line if it's not in the form you want it to be. So right here, I want you to kind of fill this out. So how to graph a line by hand. The first thing you want to do is get it into y equals form. So get that y by itself. That's the first thing you want to do. So up here, we didn't really have to do that. Down in this third example, we definitely did. So that's your first thing, is always to check or get it into y equals form. The next thing is to identify and plot y-intercept. So you're going to want to pick out your y-intercept kind of like we did up on all of them and plot that first. Then identify your slope and how you will rise and run. So you're going to want to kind of identify your slope, and then that will tell you how to rise and how to run to your next point. Okay, and your final step is to connect points with straight edge. And put arrows and label line. So this is kind of like your finishing. You want to connect the points first of all with a straight edge, so it's not a crazy line. You want to put arrows on it, and you also want to label it. Okay, So that is really how to graph a line. The only other thing I want to talk about is we didn't really graph one that had a negative slope. So I do want to look at one that has a negative slope, particularly number 4. So the first thing, this is already in y equals, which makes my life really easy. So all I can do, I can just identify that y-intercept. So my y-intercept is 4, which means that coordinate point is 0, 4. So that would be up here. So I plot my y-intercept. My slope, or my rise over run, is negative 2/3. Okay, so this is a good one to talk about because we have the rise over run and it's negative. So a lot of students ask me, all right, so which number does the negative have with it? And the answer is one or the other. Because if both numbers had a negative with it, they would divide to make a positive fraction. Negative divided by a negative gives me a positive. If only one of them is negative, that gives me a negative fraction. So you can choose which one to make negative, but just don't make them both negative. So for example, if you choose the 2 to be negative, that means you're going down 2 for your rise. And that means your 3 is positive, so 3 will still go in the positive direction. If you choose your 3 to be negative, that means you'll go up 2 and you'll go to the left 3. So if I do this one, I'm going down 2 to the right 3. Down 2 to the right 3. Okay, which gets me to my next point. If I did this one, I would go up 2, which is off the grid, and go to the left 3. So you would see it would still get me to my next point. It would just go in the other direction. So I'd still have this straight line here. I just moved differently, which is essentially the same. If you had both of them negative, you would actually be moving in the positive direction. So that's why you only make one of those negative. So I'll just connect my dots here and label this line like I did, and that's the line y equals negative 2/3 x plus 4. So that is how you graph a line by hand. So complete the rest of the practice and then ask me any questions you have in class.